So, Jekyll and Hyde is an indie film that I discovered when I was a teenager. It is directed by Nick Stillwell. Uh, Nick Stillwell, yep, that's how you pronounce it. And it came out in 2006. Basically, around the age that I was when I was extremely into indie horror. And picked this off the shelves at Blockbuster, the Blockbuster days, on DVD, where, 10 years before it would have been VHS, but DVDs were out at this point, and I came across it. The cover looked pretty cool. Like I said, I'm extremely into indie film today, and definitely was when I was a teenager. So, discovered this film. I remember loving it. I remember loving the hell out of it, actually, and I wanted to revisit it. It's been probably 14 years since I've seen it last, and I remember it being really good, so I thought this would be a really nice one to purchase, revisit, and review. So that's exactly what I'm going to be doing right now, starting with if it holds up from the last time I've seen it when I was younger. It does. I don't like it as much as I remember liking it. I remember liking it more, but I still had a really good time with it. It was absolutely fantastic. It's got a lot of really cool elements to it, and it's got a lot of cheesy elements to it as well. It's what I would say is the perfect film that somebody would release immediately after graduating film school, or during film school. It's like the perfect project that you would, as a film student, release during film school or I can't even talk, after film school or something like that. Like, for what it is, it's pretty amazing. I mean, it's not a Hollywood blockbuster, but it's a fantastic indie film, and that's what indie film is all about. It's getting content created from people who are passionate in the industry and want to make great movies and are starting out at, $500,000 instead of 500 million, like Steven Spielberg and all that. So it's amazing for what it is, and I appreciate it for what it is, and I appreciate all films for what they are, and that's kind of how I judge them and go by reviewing them. So it does its job, that's for sure. So going basically reviewing it, there might be spoilers. So if you just want to pick it up and watch it yourself, do that. Or if you've seen it already, or if you're interested in knowing a little bit about the film, continue viewing. So it's Jekyll and Hyde, so you're getting a basic modern day take on it. You basically start the film starts with the end of the film, so you already there's surprises, but you already kind of know where things are heading. Whereas this it starts with a medical student, and he wants to experiment in this drug that he basically chemically forms. It's kind of like a version of ecstasy, and he kind of plays with ecstasy pills and enhances them in a way that can enhance your personality and really target certain brain neurons in your head, so you can basically become a whole different person, essentially. And he starts playing with this, and he runs it by his professor, who is absolutely against it, obviously. And he decides to basically take things into his own hands. I found the cheesy pretty, or I found the acting pretty cheesy. I found the characters very stereotypical, and that's one thing that I will mention with this film. It's a product of its time. This is the early 2006, but like 2000 to 2010, it feels like a 90s film. It feels like a film that was released, in 1998, just after Scream or something. So this guy lives in a massive loft, which is another thing that late 90s, early 2000s films had going. They always had like massive lofts that are meters wide with, you know, a couch and a television in the middle of them, and everything else is empty. I mean, I guess it was a trend. Maybe it was a trend for the times, but it seems freaking expensive. But that was a huge thing in films from this era. Um, Jeez, there's a club scene that is super erotic. Basically, it looks like a sex club. It acts like a sex club, and we have Henry J. Jeckyll, the lead character, kind of treating Martha, or starting to treat Martha like shit, basically. And she has this friend of hers, Dan, played by Zach Bennett, and also I should probably mention the other Jeckyll is played by Brian Fisher and Martha by Bree Turner. Haven't really looked up their career, so I don't know where they went since making Jeckyll and Hyde. But Dan is basically the guy in the friend zone. You know, that poor sucker in this club scene trying to make a move on Martha, and Martha turns him down, and he's all like, "Oh well, you know, Jeckyll or Henry, you know, all of a sudden got this huge confidence, charisma, and ego, and now you're all of a sudden you're, you know, bending backwards for him." Eh, sometimes that happens, but he gets pretty pissed about it, and then he goes outside of the club, and he realizes that Henry J. Jeckyll is banging this broad on the stairwell, and then he really gets pissed, and he's like, "Oh, what the hell's wrong with you?" And he confronts him. Henry, or Hyde at that point, is like, "Well, you know, whatever," and then he goes back to his apartment, or his massive loft, and he starts making videos too, basically showing his experiences using this drug, this ecstasy plus 2.0, whatever you want to say. Let's just call it ecstasy 2.0. And he's recording the videos of himself using this ecstasy 2.0, and you can really tell that he's deteriorating. And again, the film starts at his worst, and then it kind of backtracks, showing how he got there, but it bounces back and forth to like showing him really bad, and then 3 weeks earlier, and whatnot. Um, he yeah, he essentially he just loses all his friends, basically, and his friends are always trying to kind of see what is going on with him, and it deteriorates. I mean, it is a depressing film, to say the least. Another thing I really liked about this film is its score. The music is really good. They kind of blend this classical slash opera vibe to the scenes, and it really escalates what the film is going for, especially with like its esque, or what it was going for, especially with the times. Well, because this film has a lot of reminiscence to when it was released. It's extremely obvious, which I'll probably mention a few times in this review, because it's just super obvious. I mean, it's everything I remember as being a teenager. So, I mean, there's it also blends with like a little bit of an industrial score, like kind of trying to blend metal with classical, kind of like a Marilyn Manson slash Ramstein slash something else, maybe, I don't know. But I dug the music. That's one of the positives in this film for sure. Probably the acting is where it starts to dive a little bit into the negatives. I mean, there's a scene. Basically, the female professor is telling the student not to go forth with this experiment, and she's like, just play it safe, and he's just like, I don't do safe. So screw you and screw your, or something like that. It's laughably bad. The dialogue in this film is bad and laughably written, but it's it doesn't take away from the film. It's just cheesy, basically. A lot of films from the 90s and the 2000s were extremely cheesy. There's a sex scene, which again, very amongst of its times, where there's metal music playing in the background, and it's directed like a 1998 film, but is a 2006 film. So there's that. When Henry A. Jeckyll starts to change into Hyde, I can understand where he's coming from, and he plays the character perfectly. He delivers the character perfectly, in his psyche anyway. There's a scene involving him with a younger girl in a bar, which makes no sense the way it's directed, but there's a scene with where he's all charming and charismatic, and he comes into this bar, and there's this girl who in the United States, she's clearly not 21. Like, clearly not 21. She might even be like 16 or something. It's really weird. And she's sitting there and she wants a drink, and he comes by, and he looks maybe 22 or 23, and he asks the bartender for a drink after the bartender just finished refusing this girl, and he's like, "Oh, that vodka soda's for me," and he slips him a $50 bill, and he's like, "Oh, keep the change," and then they make this eye contact where it's like the bartender's like, "Oh, okay, well, I'll just take the money and I'll just keep my mouth shut." That shit doesn't happen, man. You don't. Clearly, the bartender knows that the dude is gonna slip the drink to the 16-year-old looking chick, and I just, again, it was laughable, but he's starts being all charming to her, and he wants to take her back home, and they go back home, and she says, like, basically, "So, do you want to make out?" And I don't know if the director wanted to, like, play with her innocence that way, where she was maybe expecting to just make out with the guy and not go further, but anyway, she ends up, being slayed, obviously, because Hyde comes out, and Hyde is the alter ego of Jeckyll, and although he aims for the drug, and this is where I can see the character doing what he does, because he is bullied at the beginning of the film, and you feel sympathy for him, and he discovers this limitless drug, if you've ever seen the film Limitless, where it kind of takes his psyche into another dimension where he can be basically a superhero, but it's used for the wrong reasons, basically. There's a quote actually at the beginning of the film, and I'm not going to rehearse the whole thing, but there's a quote at the beginning of the film that kind of has to do with ego tripping and stuff like that, and it's said by the star, Henry J. Jeckyll, and at the end of the film, the same quote is said by his girlfriend throughout the film. The girlfriend, I got her name, Martha. Martha, who basically was friends with Henry Jeckyll at the beginning, and then started having an affair with him once he started developing this huge ego and huge confidence, which is great, but your ego and confidence can sometimes turn you into a monster, unfortunately. So, but like I said, it's a really ambitious idea, and it's a really ambitious feat for the director. I really enjoyed the film, and it plays with ideas really well, extremely well. I can see this director with more experience going, you know, developing, taking his ideas and making them better, for sure. I looked him up. I haven't really seen him direct much else, but for I mean, for a starter film, I really can recommend Jekyll and Hyde, and it's got really phenomenal elements to it. It's basically just lacking in budget and lacking, like, not lacking, but it's, it's a first film. Hands down, it's a first film. Can't complain about that though. But yeah, there's a ton of elements to the film that I could go on, about.